Today we're taking a quick look at the DF64 with SSP multi-purpose burrs. I've had this grinder for about a week on loan from a friend who decided to upgrade their setup. So this is more of a first look or a first impressions type of video as opposed to a full review, but I still wanted to share my thoughts as someone who's thinking of upgrading from my own grinder, the Baratza Vario, which I've had for quite a while. And I have to say that the DF64 actually surprised me a bit. I like it a lot more than I was expecting to, but there are a few big caveats for me with this grinder that may move the needle one way or the other if this is a grinder that you are considering. So first impressions of the DF64 out of the box. I have to say that aesthetically is a lot better than I was expecting, especially in all black. I kind of like it. I should say though that the wrap is some kind of vinyl wrap, and if you take this apart or have to lay it on its side, you can see on here that there has been a little bit of damage from a previous owner, which is fine. It's on the back. It doesn't really bother me that much, but it is something to know that if you're gonna be opening this up and modifying it, which honestly is kind of a must with this, at least for me. I don't really think that out of the box, this is the best grinder in terms of workflow, but we'll talk about that in just a minute. The user interface is pretty easy to read. The dial is easy. It moves nice and smooth. I'm actually really happy about that, considering that the adjustment system on here is pretty cumbersome and a little bit stiff and easy to overshoot, where this is nice and smooth. However, that's about where the positives end for me, because once you actually start using the grinder, static was a huge issue for me out the gate. Now, when I got it, there was no declumper in here, so they had removed the declumper previously, which honestly wasn't too bad for some lighter roasted coffees I was running through there. But then as soon as I put in a blend that was a little bit more on the developed side, then I had static going everywhere, and it was a huge problem. Luckily, they had included a Mythos declumper, which I installed and made it way, way, way better, though it does cause a bit more noise if things get stuck in there and you have to bellow them out. The dosing tin I also think is a pretty huge miss with this grinder. I've seen a lot of people modifying the forks so that it brings it up closer, which I've done manually most of the time that I've used this. I also would really prefer that it was something like a stainless steel or just some kind of metal. Just feels a little bit nicer. I have seen on Etsy some people putting out dosing tins for this that will match the color of the grinder, which I think is really cool and would have been awesome to see as an option, or just honestly standard out the gate to have this all in black and have a black metal dosing tin would be really, really nice. And at this point you might be looking at my Vario and saying like, well, you've modified this one too. You've added a different hopper and you've added this dosing cup down below. But the fact is that when I got this grinder, it worked just fine as it was out of the box. It's nice definitely to have been able to experiment and add a different hopper and experiment with how I dose with this grinder, but it wasn't a necessity and it didn't drive me crazy to use it as it was out of the box. Whereas with this grinder, I feel like fix the forks, get a different dosing cup, and potentially mess around. I think this is kind of a minor complaint for me, but this is so heavy and I feel like with how unstable the bellows are, it's just a little bit awkward to pick up, and I would rather have something that's a little bit lighter, maybe something that's wood or something that is, you know, I just don't understand why this is plastic and this is, you know, aluminum. It doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, but what about grinding performance? What if, you know, that's all that matters and maybe you're somebody with a 3D printer and all of what I just said is something that you're happy to tinker with and make parts with yourself and it's really not a big deal for you. Let's pull some shots, taste them side by side, and I'll kind of talk through the differences between shot quality and just total overall impression of the coffees that I'm getting out of each of these grinders. By the way, this is the coffee that I'm dialing in. It's a decaf coffee from Passenger. Decaf because I like to be kind to myself, and decafs honestly are really delicious and you should really drink more decafs. I have a great video on decaf espresso up here. I think it's up here somewhere. I trust you to find it if you're interested in it. I also trust you to hit the like button if you're enjoying this video and consider subscribing if you haven't already. And now let's have some coffee. And surprise, it is 2 days later because I forgot to hit record, I guess, on that whole section. So yes, we are recording, double checking. Oh my gosh. These shots pulled about the same amount of time. The one with SSPs from the DF64 was just a couple seconds shorter, or excuse me, faster. The same inputs, 18 in, about 50 grams out. You know, honestly nice. Definitely a little bit of bitterness in there. It's a nice texture, a nice kind of like juicy sweetness coming from, this is an Ethiopian coffee again, so it's going to be a little bit lighter in general. That is interesting. So this is a lot more tea-like, definitely a lot lighter, kind of a more feathery body than the Vario. Not quite as much flavor coming out, and this is something that I noticed when I tasted these side by side throughout the week, is that I get a lot of flavor up front, though I'd get some bitterness from this grinder when it was sort of like warm, hot right out of the machine. So the SSPs definitely shine a little bit more once the coffee's had a little bit of time to cool down. Yeah, more acidity starting to come out as I'm kind of talking, and these are cooling down. And on this one, it's such a small difference really, and it kind of depends on what coffees you're looking to make. If you want to do a lot of really light roasted single origin coffees, then yeah, this is definitely gonna kind of favor that a bit more, but it's also going to not be quite as, you know, geared towards somebody who's looking for a traditional espresso, something with a lot of texture, a lot of sweetness, a lot of body. This doesn't have nearly the same amount of body and texture as the Vario does. Not that it has a ton of texture. Yeah, starting to get a little bit sour. There's a little bit of like a vegetal thing coming through now. Bit more green. Yeah, the DF64 is starting to kind of round out and become just a bit of a nicer, more balanced cup. So I guess the question that needs answering now is it worth upgrading from the Vario with stainless steel burrs to the DF64 with the SSP multi-purpose burrs? And while I do think that the coffee quality is a little bit better, especially for lighter roasted coffees, which I kind of tend to prefer, I don't think it's really worth it right now, especially since the DF64 really only improves on the quality of coffee a little bit. And then it's kind of one step forward, two steps back, because the workflow on this is not as nice, and it kind of creates a bit more problems for me to solve right out the gate. And with all of the grinders that are out there on the market now, I think there's some more interesting options that I'm holding out for. I have a pre-order in for the Time & More 078S, which I'm excited to get and do another side-by-side like this, that I think I'm a little bit more confident will be a more worthwhile upgrade, especially at the Kickstarter price, which I think was about $500 US. But I don't know, it's hard to say because this grinder has kept up really well for the last 10 years. It's been a joy to use, and it's been very adaptable to whatever kind of coffee that I want to make, which is awesome. So now let's kick it to past me to wrap up. Let me know in the comments below what you think of my assessment of the DF64. Was I unfair with some of the things that I said? Are there things that you've done with yours as far as modifications go, or are you just kind of happy with how it was out of the box and it's working just fine for you? I'd love to know down in the comments below, and I hope to see you all very soon. Take care.